Today we talk about getting pregnant at 50 and why the headline never tells you the one number that actually matters.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
As you know, every few months, a headline pops up. A celebrity has a baby at 48, someone has a baby at 52. A story comes out about a woman having a baby even later than that. And almost immediately, patients think one thing. Can I do that too? And the honest answer is, maybe. But the better answer is, what exactly do you mean? Because pregnant at 50 can mean many completely different things. It can mean spontaneous pregnancy. It could mean IVF with their own eggs. It could mean embryos made from the past or eggs that were frozen when they were younger. It could mean donor eggs. It could even be a donor embryo. It could also mean a gestational carrier. Same headline, completely different biology. The headline tells you the age of the person holding the baby. It usually does not tell you the age of the egg. And in fertility, that is not small print. That is the whole book. So today, we're going to talk about getting pregnant at later ages, but we're not going to talk about it in vague, inspirational quotes. We're going to talk about the actual numbers. We're going to talk about IVF success by age. We're going to talk about how many IVF cycles it may take to reach a high chance of live birth. We're going to talk about miscarriages. We're going to talk about euploid embryos, and we're going to talk about age 45, 48, and even age 50 and above. And most importantly, we're going to separate what is possible from what is probable. Because in fertility, possible is where hope lives. But probable is where good counseling lives. And when you go through fertility treatment, you deserve both hope and math. Preferably in that order, because math first thing in the morning is a little aggressive. Let's start with the most important concept. There is not one biological clock. There are 4 clocks. The first is the egg clock. This is the one most people know about. As women get older, egg number decreases, egg quality decreases, and chromosome errors increase. The second is the uterus and body clock. Donor eggs can bypass the egg clock, but they do not make the uterus, blood vessels, pancreas, kidneys, placenta, or blood pressure younger. The third is the sperm clock. Most women who are more mature are probably with more mature men. And men do not get a free sperm pass. Sperm are made every day, but the factory still ages. And if the factory has been open for 55 years, there may be some weird wiring in the back. The fourth is the parenting clock. This is probably the toughest one to talk about, but it does matter. If someone has a baby at 55 or 60, we also have to think about the child support system, the health of the parent, and long-term planning. So when someone asks me, can I get pregnant at 48, my first response is not just yes or no. My response is, which clock are we talking about? Are we talking about your eggs? Your uterus? Are we talking about donor eggs? Or are we talking about embryos or frozen eggs from years ago? Are we talking about whether it's medically safe to carry the pregnancy? Because those are very different questions. So let's start with talking about IVF with your own eggs. This is where the statistics become very important. According to the National SART data, which stands for Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology, live births per intended egg retrieval using a patient's own egg is about 53% under age 35. So to clarify that, what it's saying is that for each retrieval that was intended after using all the embryos, the chances of coming away with a live birth is about 53% for under age 35. Now keep in mind, this is the average. This doesn't mean every clinic's this rate. It doesn't mean if you do PGT testing, it's this rate. This is the average across all patients and all clinics. From age 35 to 37, it drops to about 40%. From 38 to 40, about 26%. From 41 to 42, about 13%. And over age 42, about 4%. 4%. That's saying that if they go through an IVF cycle and use every single egg, at over age 42, only 4% of people will come away with a live birth. That is a huge drop. And the reason is not just because there are fewer eggs. It is that fewer eggs are chromosomally normal. And this is where it becomes a little bit confusing because as a 42-year-old, you may still have regular periods. You may still ovulate every month. And you will still make eggs during IVF. But the key question is, how many of those eggs can make an embryo with the correct number of chromosomes? And that's the problem. IVF does not reverse egg age. IVF does give us access to more eggs at one time. It lets us fertilize those eggs. It lets us grow them in the lab, and it lets us even test them to find out which are the best chosen ones. But IVF cannot turn a 43-year-old into a 33-year-old egg. Unfortunately, there is no flux capacitor in the embryology lab. We checked. Now, statistics are great, but we don't live in a world of statistics. So let's put this number into numbers you can actually understand. The question is, how many IVF cycles would it take to reach about an 85% chance of a live birth? And before I give you the numbers, I just want to be very clear about what this means. This is a mathematical estimate. This is not a study where we watch patients do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cycles. This estimate assumes each cycle has the same chance of success and that the patient keeps trying. That assumption is more reasonable in younger patients. It becomes less realistic as patients get older because ovarian responses changes. Embryo production changes, dropout rates are high, and in the late 40s, the data suggests the cumulative curve may plateau very quickly. So don't hear this as a promise, hear it as a way to understand the math. Now, using the national SART live birth rates by age, if you're under 35, about 3 IVF cycles gets you roughly to an 85% chance or higher of a live birth. This means completed IVF cycles and transferring all the embryos. At age 35 to 37, it takes about 4 cycles to have that 85%. At ages 35 to 37, it takes about 4 cycles. At age 38 to 40, about 7 cycles. 41 to 42, about 14 cycles. And over 42, mathematically, it would take about 46 cycles. 46. That number is not meant to be a treatment plan. Almost nobody is doing 46 retrievals. That number is being used to make the biology obvious. See, when someone says it only takes 1, they are not wrong. That is technically true. But technically, I could also win the lottery while being struck by lightning while eating a taco. The point is, possible is not the same as probable. The issue isn't at age 42 that the egg cannot work. The problem is how many eggs, embryos, transfers, dollars, month, and emotional hits it may take to find the one that can. Remember, this is just math taking the statistics and putting into real-world numbers. These are not actual plans. And it also shouldn't make you feel like you shouldn't try. This is everybody in the country into one statistic. You may be unique. You may make more eggs than most people because you have PMOS. This is just a guide to help you understand why it's hard for most people after age 42 to get pregnant. Now, let's go beyond the usual egg categories. Most national IVF data groups will group everyone over 42 together. But clinically, there's a difference between 43, 44, 45, and 50. Now, one SART course analysis tried to break it down over 42 by year, and in that study, the maximum cumulative live birth rate using a patient's own egg was about 9.7% at 43, 8.6% at 44, 5% at age 45, 3.6% at 46, 2.5% at 47, 1.5% at age 48, 2.7% at age 49, and 1.3% at age 50 or older. What this is saying that cumulatively, if you take all the people who tried at those ages, that was a live birth rate. Again, not 0, but extremely low. But I want to be careful with those numbers. First, fertility doesn't smoothly decline in a perfect staircase from 43 to 50. In fact, if you look, in the 49 age group, it was slightly higher than the 48 age group. And it's not because 49-year-olds are better than 48-year-olds at getting pregnant. It's because when you look at sample sizes that are very small and very low extreme rates, the numbers tend to bounce around and can be due to patient selection and other issues. The better interpretation is this. By the late 40s, autologous IVF success is near the floor. That means using your own eggs is a very low chance. As you've heard in my podcast before, by age 40, most people take 2 IVFs to be able to become pregnant. And several studies, such as the FORT-T trial, have shown that even wasting time with IUIs at age 40 is not worthwhile because the chances are so low at that point. What that SART analysis says is that for women 43 to 45, they had a better cumulative live birth rate than women 46 and older. But among women 46 and older, rate were not significantly different from each other. And for women 47 and older, the cumulative live birth rate appeared to plateau after the first cycle. Think of it like buying lottery tickets. Sure, you can buy one and have a chance, but by buying 2, 3, 4, or 5, did you really increase your chances statistically that much? The point is, in normal person language, more IVF cycles with your own eggs at advanced ages did not meaningfully keep building the chances up. In another study by Devisa and colleagues, they found a similar clinical message. In their single-center analysis, the cumulative live birth rate was about 7% for ages 42 to 43, but only about 1.2% from age 44 and above. The conclusion was blunt. IVF with your own eggs becomes essentially futile at 44 and older. Well, that's a strong word, futile. And I don't love that word when talking to patients because patients are not statistics, they're human beings. I don't use that word. I'll say things like, the chances are extremely low, and that may not be worth the cost or the emotional toll. But the reason that word gets used in statistics is because at some point, the probability becomes so low that continuing treatment with the same strategy may not be medically or emotionally reasonable. So for counseling, I would not tell a 50-year-old patient, you just need enough cycles. That's the wrong message. The honest message is, with your own eggs at age 50, live birth is not biologically impossible, but it is extraordinarily unlikely. I will always try because I think closure is important, but I'm also very honest. At that point, the realistic conversation usually shifts to things like donor eggs, donor embryos, or hopefully they have frozen eggs or frozen embryos from the past. The point is, case reports, which are just single studies, are not treatment plans. So you can see a single study saying that a patient at 49 got pregnant on her own or with IVF. Keep in mind, those are medical unicorns with PubMed IDs, not real treatment plans. Now, let's talk about pregnancy versus live birth. Patients often say, but can I still get pregnant? And yes, pregnancy does matter, but pregnancy is not the final outcome. Live birth is the final outcome, having a baby in your arms. As age increases, 2 things happen at the same time. The chances of getting pregnant go down, but the chances of a miscarriage also goes up. And this is because embryo chromosome errors increase with age. So even when the pregnancy happens, the chance that the pregnancy continues to live birth is lower. This is probably one of the most painful parts of reproductive aging. It's not just harder to get pregnant, it's harder to stay pregnant. In the Devisa study I discussed before, miscarriage rates rose dramatically with age. For women 38 to 39, miscarriage rate was about 23%. For women 40 to 41, 36%. And for women 42 to 43, 49%. And in women 44 and older, about 70%. That's a brutal number, but it explains what patients often experience. They may still make embryos, they may still get positive pregnancy tests, but many of those pregnancies are genetically abnormal and do not continue to live birth. This is why fertility counseling should not focus on only pregnancy rates. Pregnancy is the mile marker. Live birth is the destination. And sometimes, in older reproductive age, patients are getting to the mile marker and not reaching the destination. And that's heartbreaking. And it's exactly why the numbers matter. Now, let's talk about euploid embryos. A euploid embryo means the embryo has the correct number of chromosomes based on the cells tested. And this matters because the biggest reason IVF success drops with age is that fewer embryos are chromosomally normal. So, if a 42-year-old patient does IVF and creates a euploid embryo, her chances with that embryo is much better than if she transfers with untested embryos. But we have to say this correctly. PGT-A does not make the embryos better. It does not heal an embryo. It doesn't turn the abnormal embryo into a normal embryo. It is more like checking the label before you put the package on the truck. If the embryo is euploid, the transfer odds become more similar across age groups, but they are not perfectly identical. When you look at national SART data for frozen blastocyst transfers with PGT-A, you'll see that for under age 35, it's about 55% live birth. Yet for 35 to 37, it's 53%. And 38 to 40, about 52%. And 49% for 41 to 42. And then after 42, around 47%. Now, what the difference is? Why 55 for one group and all the way down to 47 for another group? So yes, the euploid embryos dramatically improve the conversation, but they do not erase the age completely. Now, I want to be careful here too, because this does not prove that age alone is causing all the differences. This is not a randomized controlled trial where every embryo is identical and the only variable is age. Older patients have fewer embryos to choose from. So they may be choosing embryos that are euploid but have lower grade. They may have more day 6 or day 7 embryos. Or there may be other medical factors such as uterine factors. And there are some biological differences that PGT-A does not fully capture. So why might a euploid embryo from older patients still have a slightly lower chance than a similarly tested embryo from a younger patient? Well, there are several possible reasons. First, PGT-A checks chromosome number. It does not check everything about the embryo health. It doesn't fully measure mitochondrial function, cytoplasmic quality, epigenetics, embryo metabolism, or every genetic issue. Second, the biopsy is a sample. It's a very good sample, but it's still a sample. It doesn't represent the entire embryo. Third, embryo grades matter. Day 5, day 6, day 7, those all matter. Inner cell mass, trophectoderm grades, those things matter. And fourth, the uterus and body still matter. Things like adenomyosis, fibroids, endometrial tissue inflammation, metabolic health, vascular health, blood pressure, diabetes risk, none of these disappear because the embryo is euploid. And as we get older, those things seem to appear more. So the clean way of saying this is a euploid embryo removes the biggest age-related barrier, but not every age-related barrier that's possible. I know this podcast has been long, but a few more things we need to touch. One of them is, how many blastocysts do you need to have a 90% chance of finding at least one euploid embryo? And when I say blastocyst, I mean an embryo that is good enough to be biopsied. Now keep in mind, these are estimates. Different labs and studies report slightly different numbers. Remember, patients are not averages, but this is still very helpful for counseling especially. So under age 35, if roughly 60% blastocysts are euploid, you need about 3 blastocysts to have a 90% chance of finding at least one euploid embryo. Now keep in mind, that's not a 90% chance of success, just a 90% chance of finding at least one euploid embryo. Now when you get to 35, 37, it's about 50% euploid success. So now you need about 4 blastocysts to get one euploid embryo at a 90% confidence rate. At 38 to 40, about 38% are euploid, which means you need about 5 blastocysts. And by 41 to 42, because 27% are euploid, you need about 8 blastocysts to come away with a 90% chance of finding at least one euploid embryo. Now after that age group, the data becomes much less stable. And by the mid to late 40s, the number of blastocysts needed become unrealistic for most patients to use their own egg. Again, not impossible, just improbable. And remember, blastocysts are not eggs. That's the trap. Patients here, you got 8 eggs, and 8 sounds like a lot of eggs. But the eggs are just the beginning of the funnel. Some eggs are mature, some are not. Some eggs fertilize, some do not. Not all of them become blastocysts, and even the ones that do, not all of them are suitable for biopsy. A simple attrition model is this. 10 eggs retrieved may give 8 mature eggs, 6 may fertilize, and maybe 3 usable blastocysts. That means in that 35-year-old, if they need 3 blastocysts that have a 90% chance of a euploid embryo, they need to start with 10 eggs. And if you're the person that needs 8 blastocysts, well, now you need around 27 eggs. This is why a 32-year-old may do one retrieval and make several euploid embryos, while a 43-year-old may be doing multiple retrievals and makes just 1 to none. That's not bad luck. That's the math of ovarian aging. This is why understanding the attrition rate is important to understand, because unfortunately, eggs are not embryos. Not all embryos are blastocyst. Not all blastocysts mean they're going to be euploid, and euploid doesn't guarantee babies. Unfortunately, every step matters in that funnel. Now, here's the good news, and although it's not for everyone, let's talk about donor eggs. Donor eggs are one of the most powerful tools in fertility medicine. If someone is 45, 48, or 50, even postmenopausal, donor eggs can restore the embryo side of the equation because the egg is coming from a younger donor. Now, donor eggs may reset the egg clock, but they don't reset the pregnancy clock. A donor egg from a 25-year-old is not the same thing as a 25-year-old carrying a pregnancy. So that 50-year-old carrying that pregnancy does have some other issues. And I'm not saying the uterus may not work, it should. But the problem is there could be cardiovascular system issues, blood pressure risk, diabetes risk. So when the patient says, can I get pregnant at 50? The answer with donor eggs is often biologically yes. But the next question is, should she carry the pregnancy herself? And that answer is individualized. It depends on the health of the patient. Most clinics are going to require medical clearance for women 45 and older. The good news is, if you're going to use donor eggs, you have some time because the rate doesn't change that much with age. So if you want to try with your own eggs and you're around 42, 43, go for it. Keep in mind that when you do go to donor eggs, it won't change much. One caveat to that is that if your clinic doesn't allow transfers after a certain age, you do want to know that number to make sure you use donor eggs by that time. Now, when it comes to the safety of patients getting pregnant after 45 and 50, the data isn't very clear. And that's because we don't have a massive randomized trial of 50-year-olds getting pregnant. Most of the data is going to be retrospective and case reports. So there isn't some specific number where we say the risk doubles after a certain age. More accurately would be pregnancy after 45 is higher risk, and after 50, even higher. In one donor oocyte series cited by ASRM, pregnancy-induced hypertension was about 17% for women aged 45 to 49 and 33% for women over age 50. Concurrently, gestational diabetes was about 15% in the 45 to 49 year group and 30% in the 50 plus group. Even preterm birth before 37 weeks was about 19% in 45 to 49 year olds and 37% at 50 and older. But those numbers are not perfect. That's limited data. The point is there is risk, but we don't actually know the numbers enough to say it's definitely double. But it is reasonable enough to look at the patient and say if they already have blood pressure issues, diabetes issues, preterm labor issues, this may even be a higher risk situation. And at some point, a gestational care may be safer. This is not denying someone parenthood. This is separating the desire to have a child from the medical risk of carrying the pregnancy. And again, sometimes we forget about sperm. These men are usually older. And what we know is that as men get older, there is some issues that come with that, such as higher DNA fragmentation issues, de novo mutations that can occur in the DNA. Advanced paternal age has also been associated with things like miscarriage, stillbirth rates, autism, spectrum disorders. This is not to panic you. The point is, age matters for both women and men. And again, I'm sorry for the length of this podcast, but there's one last part to talk about. And this is the most uncomfortable one, the parenting clock. When someone has a baby at 50, 55, or 60, the question is not only, can we create a pregnancy? The question is also, what is the child support system? We're not asking, can the person become pregnant? Of course they can. And we're not even judging the desire to become pregnant. We've already talked about age-related risk. We've talked about miscarriage risk, medical complications, but we also have to think about the child's long-term support system. Who helps if the parent becomes ill? Who is the guardian if something happens? Is there family support or financial planning? This is not a discriminatory conversation. I'm not being biased here. I'm just saying the conversation should happen. I think we can all agree if someone is 95 years of age, it would probably be irresponsible to let them get pregnant. And we can also all agree that someone at 50 could be very healthy. But at some point, there is a tipping point. And no one has the answer of where that is. And no one wants to be the person that says, no, you can't have a child. So what should patients take away from this episode? Well, first, age does matter. But the way age matters depends on which clock we're talking about. Second, IVF with your own eggs drops sharply with age, especially after age 40 and dramatically after 42. Third, the number of cycles needed to reach a high cumulative chance of live birth is a mathematical estimate, not a promise. And in the late 40s, the observed data suggests the curve may plateau near the floor. Fourth, pregnancy is not the same as live birth. Miscarriages arises with age because chromosomal errors arise. Fifth, euploid embryos change the odds dramatically, but they do not make age irrelevant. Sixth, donor eggs can be incredibly effective, but they reset the egg clock, not the pregnancy clock. Seventh, age 50 with own eggs is not impossible, but the published cumulative live birth rate data suggests it's extremely unlikely. Eighth, men age 2. Sperm is not magical fairy dust with a beard. And ninth, later parenthood can be beautiful, but it requires honest planning. The biggest lesson is this: celebrity headlines are not fertility counseling. A headline may say she had a baby at 50, but the patient deserves the full story. You don't know, was it her eggs? Was it donor eggs? Was an embryo made earlier? You don't even know she carried the pregnancy herself. But when we answer those questions, we move the fantasy to medicine. The point is, pregnancy later in life is possible. Sometimes it's reasonable, and sometimes it's not. But every patient deserves counseling that is honest, data-driven, and compassionate. Not fear, not false hopes. Just the numbers, the options, and the truth. Because in fertility, hope matters, but hope works best when it brings a calculator. Hopefully you liked this episode. Again, sorry it was long, but there was a lot of data to go over. As always, I greatly appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. If you find this podcast helpful or for a friend, please tell them about us and give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium. But most of all, keep coming back. I look forward to talking again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.